So our next session is Navigating the Geopolitics of AI, Europe's Path to Technological Sovereignty. And I would like to call to the stage Vassilis Koutsoumpas. He is the Digital Policy and AI Advisor to the Prime Minister of Greece. And Mr. Giorgos Verdi, Policy Fellow, European Council on Foreign Relations. And all this is going to be moderated by my colleague from EuroNews, Symela Touchtidou. Welcome.
Now we have to beat the machine and keep the interest of the audience. So let's try our best. We have a sexy topic, as mentioned before, geopolitics and AI. And Giorgos, I would like to start with you. What do geopolitics have to do with AI? I mean, how can we put these two terms in the same sentence?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Symela. Well, I think we could argue that today we see a race unfolding between the great powers of our time over who is going to lead and control the development of artificial intelligence. As most of you know, the United States and China are the clear protagonists in this race. And Europe, unfortunately, has fallen behind. And we are fighting for third place at best. We know that Europe has fallen behind in this geopolitical race due to some key metrics, some key indicators that showcase our AI competitiveness is not on par with the United States or China. Key indicator number one, we are behind in terms of investment. So in 2023, American AI companies attracted about $67 billion of investments. European AI companies only attracted $7 billion of investment. So already we see a $60 billion gap existing between the two sides of the Atlantic. Secondly, when it comes to entrepreneurship, again, in 2023, in the United States, there were about 900 newly funded AI companies. By comparison, in Europe, we only had about 250 newly funded AI companies. So we're behind in terms of entrepreneurship as well. And finally, what is also more stark, I think, and common to most people, is our lack of European AI champions. So only about 3% of the world's unicorn startups in AI come from Europe. By contrast, the US is, of course, home to multiple AI companies working in the frontier of AI development. China is home, of course, to DeepSeek, who shook the world a few weeks ago with its impressive R1 and V3 models. We simply lack those household names in Europe. Now, up until a few weeks ago, two European startups used to feature prominently in this discussion about European AI champions. One was the German Aleph Alpha, the other one was the French Mistral. Unfortunately, Aleph Alpha announced that it would quit the race to build cutting-edge frontier AI models because it was too expensive and instead focus on business consulting use cases. Mistral is the only European AI champion that keeps going for now, but this leaves Europe in a vulnerable position because if let's say Mistral is not able to compete, then European consumers and businesses may be faced with a stark option to depend only on American and Chinese providers with little to no choice over the values that underpin such technology. So I think the main question then that we will have to answer as Europeans is why did this happen? How did we find ourselves in this situation, and what can we do in order to ameliorate it? And there are multiple interpretations and analysis about how this situation came to being. I think one of the most popular explanations that we heard time and time again today, and I think is worth spending some time on, is of course EU's overregulation issue, right? So of course AI and digital technologies bring some fantastic benefits to our lives, but they also come with some risks. And in Europe, we decided to regulate these risks in order to prevent such harms from materializing.
We'll talk about risks later on and regulation a lot, but before we go into that, I want to have your opinion on what the EU Commission President said, that the race is still on and it hasn't been lost yet. Mm-hmm. Do you agree?
Of course. I mean, at the end of the day, as I said, Europe has still one European AI champion working in the frontier of AI development. We still have many advantages to our benefits, from our fiscal capacity to our consumer power. Let's not forget, at the end of the day, we are a strong consumer market of about 450 million relatively wealthy consumers, and that is what makes Europe largely a superpower. On the other hand, there are many disadvantages as well that the US and China don't have to face, such as our disunity, our fragmentation. So to maybe respond to the President, of course, Europe is still in the race. However, quick action will be needed if we also want to keep up with the others too, who are marching ahead right now.
Vassilis, in this race, which place could Greece claim?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to join you. I think this is the first time I have a chance to speak publicly ever since I got this role and ever since I moved back from the United States. So it's a pleasure to join you. Well, I think Giorgos said it very well. Greece can help in two fronts when it comes to EU not lagging behind in the race, and it's a marathon. Obviously, it's not a sprint. The first one is the national level, and I think that as we showed in the case of digitization, Greece might be lagging in different sectors and different fields when it comes to public administration, but there are certain sectors where we can leapfrog. Digitization was one of them, and I think that AI can be the case as well. So on the national front, what we can do at first glance is provide some use cases, the use of public interest technologies in the public sector, and how best we can leverage them. And these use cases can be, differently used in different European contexts. For example, recently the Minister of Digital Governance and Deputy Minister Kyrianakis moved forward with incorporating AI in land registry legal checks. Now, what was happening before, and this is very case-specific, some of you or most of you might have gone through this, is that you would go to a local land registry office with all your paperwork and everything, and then the local employee would have to input all the data manually by themselves, would have to do the legal checks by themselves, and so on. Working with Microsoft, they incorporated AI in the legal check analysis, in the input of data, and now these clauses, these contracts are either filled automatically, you're either given prompts to fill, and the data is not inputted manually. What that practically did is that it increased transactions from September of 2024 to February of 2025 from 5,000 per week to 13,000 per week. The time it took for one transaction went from 2 hours on average to around 11 minutes on average. And the money it saved went from 15 euros per transaction, which might not sound a lot, to 0.11 euros per transaction. So this is a 99% change in cost. So, and this use case, by the way, when we were in Paris, Microsoft came out with an announcement as a best practice for the use of AI in public sector. So I think there are different use cases that we can incorporate in public administration, and those use cases can be used as an example on the European front.
Are there, sorry to interrupt, are other projects like that in the pipeline?
Yes, there are, but I have a feeling that's going to be later discussed, so I wouldn't want to reveal more, but I will share a few more later down in our discussion. And the second part is what we can do on the European front, which is what is Greece's stance when it comes to the EU Act, to regulation, to the Invest AI Fund that was just announced, to the European AI Champions Initiative. And what I've been saying for the past 2 months that I've been doing this is that definitely on the highest levels of government, and the Prime Minister reiterated that in Paris, there is this idea that government can use AI to be a disruptor, and that we can effectively reimagine the state in the 21st century by providing efficient public services with less cost and more expediently. So I think that on the national front, we can provide specific use cases where Greece is leapfrogging, and then other European countries can use them as an example. And then on the European front, I think that the Prime Minister made it very clear that Greece is a very pro-innovation country, and that we don't need huge amounts of regulation, we need purposeful regulation on specific sectors that I'm guessing we'll address later on.
Yes, the EU has a reputation of leading in regulation. Giorgos, you have taken part in the discussions for the AI Act. I would like to have your thoughts on this legal framework. Was it a hasty movement? I mean, was EU too willing to act on that front? And should it have waited for a global institution maybe to impose some common rules that would not stifle innovation or impede competition, competitiveness?
It's a fantastic and very complex question, so let's try to break it down. As you said, Symela, before joining the ECFR, I used to work as a policy advisor to small businesses and startups based in Brussels, and I was there when the AI Act negotiations were taking place. So I was in a very privileged position to speak at the same time with industry as well as with policymakers when the file was being formed and be part of the debates. Now, to start with your first question, if it was too early, it depends, of course. But some arguments I think that can be put in towards the side of that it wasn't too early. And I think there are three main points that need to be raised here. First of all, the risks from AI are real, of course. And as consumers and as citizens, we want to also be protected from these risks. We have already many use cases from the Netherlands, where the Dutch tax authorities integrated AI in order to spot fraud, benefits fraud, and ended up falsely accusing tens of thousands of families and requesting the money that they had received back due to a faulty algorithm, to many other use cases, for example, AI tools used in human resource management that would prioritize male applicants due to the biases in the company's history. So the risks are there, and I think the need for some kind of regulation was there as well. And to reinforce that, I think in Europe we also have the inherent disadvantage of, again, being the sum of 27 different countries. So we must also not forget that the response of Europe not regulating would probably not be 0 regulations, but would be 27 different regulations, each coming from one member state, which would be an equally disruptive impact on businesses. Now, having said that, is the AI Act and is the EU's approach perfect? Probably not. It comes with a lot of cost, it comes with a lot of legal complexity. To give you an example, if you were to create an AI startup here in Greece today and wanted to develop and provide high-risk AI systems, so these would be systems that would be used, let's say, again, in HR management, in critical infrastructure, in medical devices, in education, you would need to pay something around 100,000 to 300,000 euros for compliance with the AI Act, and that's only for the first year. So we can see how that can turn innovators away from the market, can raise a high barrier to enter the market, and it may not be such an issue for larger companies who have these large legal teams and the financial resources, but for startups and small businesses, it can have a chilling effect. So I think to sum it up, the conclusion is always finding the right balance, right? So it's not no regulation versus having regulations, but it's having regulations that work, that are effective, are simplifying, can work for startuppers, and can at the same time boost the trust of the market towards these AI systems. Because one of the benefits the regulation can have is that it helps consumers be a little bit less afraid of those AI systems and actually go to the market and select them when they have the choice.
Vassilis, even EU leaders admit that too much regulation can be a burden. Do you think that the EU might move into a direction of reforming? And what Greece would have to say about that?
First of all, let me take a step back, because I think that in the past few weeks, it's very cool to beat Europe up. From Paris to Munich and then London, I think we've been getting a lot of criticism, which there are many things that Europe can definitely do better, and we'll speak to that. But we've been doing good. Again, I just moved back from the States. Not everything works perfectly there. The problem is that I think it has to do with the European regulatory ethos, and I think that's the basis of it all. If you take a step back, this has been the European Gordian knot ever since the conception of the Union. It's very well entrenched within our European DNA, regulation versus innovation. And I think when we managed to move forward, we understood that there's no binarity. And for example, take the case of sustainability, the climate crisis and industrialization. For many years, we considered these two to be mutually exclusive, and it required this, shift in thinking and approach when we said to ourselves, maybe they're not, maybe we can grow competitive businesses and at the same time work towards an effective green transition. Now, the details, of course, of how you do this are very important, and we can disagree about them all day. But I think that required a shift in the way we approach things. And I think when it comes to AI, we're in a transitionary state because, and my opinion is that we maybe did too much too soon. The earliest drafts of the EU AI Act came out, even before ChatGPT-4 was in the market, let alone, reasoning models that came after it or models that have agentic properties. So it kind of went ahead to regulate a very nascent technology. And when I say nascent, I don't mean that AI didn't exist before that, right? It obviously existed in different applications. It was just democratized in a way that everyone had it in their homes, and it made sense. It created a need to regulate it. So the first thing I would say about Europe is that our initial approach when we see a technology, when we see a development, is caution, is security, is trying to put on guardrails, following, a very protectionist, cautionary approach. And it makes sense because our regulatory model is very much rights-driven, protecting the consumer online, protecting the consumer in general, which is us. And obviously that's not bad, But to me, and I had this colleague in the US who used to say that, so that's not my line, he used to say that European regulators remind me of beavers. Whenever they see a river overflowing, the first thing they see is how do they build a dam. And they neglect sometimes that, there's life in the river or next to the river. So I think that the first thing we need to do on the European level is change our foundational approach towards developments in the tech sector. And the moment we see something happening, it shouldn't be, how is this going to change my life? It should be, how is this going to change my life? And I think if there's one thing to borrow from our colleagues across the pond is this techno-optimism and how technology can definitely, make our lives better. Now, having said that, what is Greece's stance in all of this? Obviously, the Greek government, has certain obligations, being part of the European family, which will follow through. That is part of it is the EU AI Act. We're now in the process of creating our national AI authority, which needs to be operational by August 2025, which will monitor effectively the EU AI Act. But we're not in favor of overregulation, and the Prime Minister mentioned that repeatedly in Paris. We are in favor of purposeful regulation. So I think it's a bit of a daydream to think that the US, Europe, especially at this point, China, Global South, major developed economies in Asia will set global standards when it comes to AI regulation. But we do believe that there's a benchmark, there's a bare minimum, a common denominator that we can all agree. For us, three specific things. One, I think it's clear as daylight, is the development of CBRN weapons using AI. The second is the spread of disinformation using AI-generated images and videos. And the third one, which is really important for the Prime Minister as well, is the protection of minors online and from internet addiction. As you might know, Greece, a couple of months ago, revealed its national strategy to protect minors online. And next week, I'll be heading to Brussels with Minister Papasteriou to present it to other member states. So we do believe that there's a common baseline in these three things where we can all agree, set some ground rules, but apart from that, we do need to change the way we look at regulation. And the last part I want to say when it comes to the EU, the regulation, doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not the only thing we should be doing. To other things, we definitely need to, invest in, and President von der Leyen spoke about it recently, is deepening our commitment to the Capital Markets Union, so it could be as seamless to raise capital in Berlin as it is in Lisbon, as it can be in Athens. And the second thing I want to mention is that as far as the US goes, because I think it is really important to find ways to communicate in this developing partnership between the EU and the US, as we've seen in the past few days. I think that the EU and the US Trade and Technology Council needs to take on a new role. I think it can play a great role in between the US and the EU in negotiating important issues, and maybe it should change its function and become a council pertaining to dual-use technologies, so meaning technologies used for military and civilian applications. But that's another whole topic.
Yeah, and Giorgos Vassilis mentioned this information, and we see now there is this debate about EU authorities looking into American big tech practices. Do you see regulation becoming a new reason for another trade war between the US and Europe?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, trade tensions between the US and Europe over the EU's regulatory approach have been long time in the making. So even before Trump's arrival to the White House, we saw, for example, how some American AI products wouldn't come to Europe, or the launch would be delayed because of the regulatory uncertainty they would face. And that made it very clear that some American companies and some American policymakers dislike the EU's regulatory approach, and they wish to see Europeans change their course. Now, of course, with Trump's arrival, I'd say this trend has been turbocharged. Trump himself has stated that he will not let Europeans take advantage of American companies. And as you say, the first field where we see this kind of reaction playing out is in the online social media platform space. There, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, threatened that the US would pull out of NATO if Europe was to regulate Musk's X platform, and if we were to impose fines due to claims of disinformation, which they would claim as censorship. So based on these statements, based on these positions, I think it's also likely that we might see in the future the Trump administration trying to prevent the EU's AI rules from being enforced to American companies. So in a future scenario where, let's say, OpenAI, a theoretical example, is found to be in violation of the AI Act, then we could see a scenario where Trump would apply geopolitical pressure and leverage in order to prevent fines and other remedial measures being applied to OpenAI or any other American company.
Where would that leave Europe?
Sorry?
Where would that leave Europe? I mean, obviously it's dependent in many ways on the US to work on and build on AI. NVIDIA chips are most easy example. Yeah. So can we actually afford such a trade war?
It is a very complex question, absolutely. I mean, as you say, we are largely dependent on US-American providers, and even, let's say, if the cutoff of these services was not an issue, then there are many other leverages that the US could pull to apply pressure to the Europeans as well. So absolutely, it's critical that we take action now and that we have a common approach to this issue in order to prevent such things from happening. And I think there is some leeway for space. Well,
do you see you backing, taking steps back like we expected to do in some of its green policies? Do you see the same in AI?
Yeah. That is absolutely one scenario, yes. Now, I think, however, this is a different conversation if we decide to simplify our digital and technology regulations because we want to boost our competitiveness, because we want to catch up with others. It is another issue if we actually end up doing that because of the geopolitical pressures applied by the United States. The latter would set a terrible precedent for the rule of law. So when it comes to that, I think there is a good case to be made for that, but shouldn't come from outside pressures. Besides this, I think there are some other leeways that the Europeans could pull. Well, first of all, also taking back control of the narrative that's being pushed by the Trump administration. At the end of the day, these regulations were not intended to harm American companies. They equally apply to Chinese, European, American providers, and I think that is something European leaders must really emphasize in their rhetoric and communication to the US. And secondly of all, I think we also need to become more transactional, right? Trump loves to strike deals, and it's time that we find our own leverage that we can use in order to find a sense of renewed understanding with the United States. To give you one example of such leverage, Europe dominates in the supply chain of semiconductors equipment, and especially lithography machines coming from the Netherlands. So one example could be that we could agree to control or limit the export of such machines to China in exchange for the unhindered application of our digital rulebook and in exchange for finding a new sort of terms of cooperation with the United States on digital regulations. But this, again, requires unity between member states and also thinking in a Europeanized way. Because, again, if member states are thinking, right, these lithography machines are being created in the Netherlands, so this is something up to the Netherlands to decide if they're going to be export controlled or not, then we will be weak against the United States who, with the Trump administration who wants to sow divisions. However, if we are able to Europeanize that approach, we'll have a much stronger hand to play.
Vassilis, where does this leave national authorities? I mean, you mentioned before that the Greek government is working on the AI regulation in Greece. Would it make sense to wait and see how it plays out, this tension between the US and the EU? Or should we go ahead with what we have so far and build on that?
First of all, let me pick on Giorgos' point, and he talked about, I think, briefly the export controls that have come out of the United States for the past few years, now intensifying a bit. And it's very interesting because, you know, you're not just dealing with governments, you're dealing also with the private sector, and Microsoft President Brad Smith came out with a blog spot a few days ago, not condemning, but kind of advising the new administration to lift a few of those chip restrictions, especially to close US allies. And actually, Greece had a special mention in his blog spot because Microsoft has a huge presence here and actively moving forward with 3 data centers. So I think that, you know, this is an industry that doesn't agree on a lot, but there was some consensus that these export controls at the end of the day will hamper their business and their effort to deploy worldwide. So having said that, I think that governments around the world definitely have an ally in the private sector in the United States because they want to expand their businesses as well. Now, the second point here is that the EU AI Act is not going to be repealed in the sense that we might follow a more, you know, light version of it or, you know, just furnish some of the details, but we will be needing a national AI authority to properly monitor how the act is being implemented, how actors from the US, from the EU are deploying their AI applications in the country. So on the one hand, I think we're moving forward with this and it makes sense for us to abide by the obligations we have towards our European partners. On the second hand, I think that we need a common European response to everything that's coming out of the United States. And I do understand that this administration has, you know, a flair for more bilateral agreements, but I think that this is a time where we need more European solidarity, especially when it comes to the tech sector and our digital infrastructure. Having said that, again, Greece obviously is very much interested to keep the investments it already has developing. So we are actively trying to engage with the US administration, not only to be excluded from certain export controls, but also find the best ways through which our 2 governments can definitely cooperate. But I don't think we should only be looking towards the US. I think there are many good examples around the world of governments using AI and AI applications being developed in different ecosystems. For example, India is such a case and China is the other. And that doesn't, you know, necessarily mean a specific partnership with those countries, but definitely seeing what they've done and finding ways to incorporate it in the Greek ecosystem. For example, recently, the College of the Commissioners went to India for their first visit, and a few memoranda were signed between the Indian government and the EU Commission on digital infrastructure. As you know, Greece has had a very close partnership with India. Our Prime Minister visited India 2 times in the past year and probably will visit again. So, and some partnerships on the tech front will be announced. And then we're very much positively surprised by what China did with DeepSeek. because I think it changed the narrative that you need huge amounts of money to train large language models and deploy them, and it showed that open source can be a key to innovation. And it showed also that even if you squeeze a country with export controls and protectionist measures, they can still innovate. Now, having said that, there are definitely issues with content moderation that we as Greeks and as Europeans don't agree with, but we do believe that the future in Europe can be open source and should be open source. I think that's where our competitive advantage can lie in comparison to the United States, which is following a more proprietary model.
I would like to talk alternative partners, but before we go there, let's talk a bit about money. Sure. Which is what we actually need to proceed with this AI race. Giorgos, the EU Commission has pledged billions of euros, different numbers, 50, 200. Anyways, what exactly do we know about these funds? Where do they come from? And how will they be used? I mean, who will get what?
Sure. So just a few weeks ago, the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, took the stage in the AI Action Summit in Paris and announced that the EU would invest 50 billion euros to AI innovation, research and development through a new scheme called Invest AI. Now, we don't know a lot about the details of this new scheme. We know that about 30 billion of these 50 will be dedicated to a new AI Gigafactories initiative that will be directed to help train the largest and most complex AI models in Europe using about 100,000 cutting-edge chips, according to the Commission. The rest of the 20 billion euros will then go to a European AI fund, which will direct resources towards research and development, startup innovation, skills development, and all these fields. Now, this 50 billion euros is supposed to come on top, of course, of the about 2 billion euros that were dedicated for the AI Factories initiative, and will be further amplified by about 150 billion euros of private investments that were mobilized by an initiative called the EU AI Champions initiative. So all in all, this is fantastic news, right? So AI is, of course, a very resource-intense technology, requires costly energy and computing resources, and if we want to get ahead, we will, of course, need to mobilize such massive investments, and this is a great start. Now, on the other hand, I think we must also be cautious to not get caught in a race about which side is going to announce the splashiest amount of money being thrown into AI. We saw a little bit of that in the United States too. The new administration announced a Stargate project that would mobilize about $500 billion of investments in AI infrastructure. And this was a very flashy announcement too, but then the Financial Times reported that a lot of the funding for the Stargate project hasn't been secured yet, and the details and the structures of the investment have not been figured out. And I think that is a risk we are also running in the EU with these investments. We don't know if these are new resources, new kind of money, or if they are investments that will happen anyways but are rebranded. We don't know a lot about the details. So that is, first of all, very important to get right. Secondly, I think it's also important to mention that investments is only one part of the problem, right? So it's only one part of the equation. European innovators face many structural issues, and unless they're all tackled together, then we'll end up throwing money into the problem, money into the bin. Some indicative structural problems that European innovators face right now is, first of all, that we are dealing with a very fragmented single market. Again, if you are to create a startup here in Greece tomorrow and you want to scale your operations across Europe, you will have to deal with 27 different bureaucracies, 27 different labor law regimes, 24 official languages, and this creates an environment that is more complex than what your competitors in the United States have to deal with.
Can you actually deal with that? I mean, this is the way it is because there are different nations, so can you actually...
I believe you can, and I believe there is also intention.
Labor laws and languages are something you cannot.
Of course, there will always be some things that we cannot tackle and fully integrate into one single market. And at the end of the day, the United States also has some limitation going from state to state, but it is, I think, very important to try to find this common minimum denominator of a regulatory regime. And actually, there are efforts right now being done by the Commission. One of the initiatives announced as part of the competitiveness package by von der Leyen in January was this idea of a 28th legal regime. So that would be a 28th business law regime where European businesses could choose to belong to in order to be able to scale across Europe more easily. Again, this is an initiative that is upcoming. Not a lot of details have been announced, but I think there is a lot of progress to be done there and to help actually make these investments work, make these investments turn into actual innovations and not just money announcements.
Vassilis, what part of these funds for AI could come to Greece, will come to Greece?
Yeah, I think a huge issue we have at the European level is announcing things without coordinating. And you hear money thrown around, $1 billion there, $1 billion here. As Giorgos just said, there's 500 billion from Stargate, which is not yet secured. The Magnificent Seven, most of the major tech companies in the US have announced 320 billion capex spending only in 2025. And then you have the European announcements. Honestly, Greece is already getting a piece of the pie. For people that don't know, Greece was allocated one of the first 7 EU AI factories, which is currently being developed. It's a 30 million euro project co-financed by the European Union and by national funds. And I think Minister Papasteriou will talk more about it tomorrow. But that's just a first piece. The Invest AI Fund, part of it is reallocating previous funds to it, and then part of it is finding more public funds for the 4 AI gigafactories, digital education programs, and so on. But nothing specific has been announced. That's why I'm going to Brussels next week. Apart from the presentation that we will be doing with Minister Papasteriou, on Monday and Tuesday, we will be meeting people from Virkunen's cabinet, the VP for Tech Sovereignty, and Michael McGrath's and VDL's, and President von der Leyen's as well, to kind of get a better understanding, how will the Invest AI Fund be structured? What are the opportunities there for the Greek government in order to leverage funds to build the much needed infrastructure for what we're discussing? And the second is, we've been in touch with SEV as well, because we do want to understand how Greek businesses that are willing to participate in the EU AI Champions Initiative can actually do it. Because another thing is, that was announced.
We don't have any right now, right?
No, we don't. Another thing is that this was announced as well, but there was no previous coordination about it. There's no mention of how much of the money has been committed by said businesses and how much it has already been raised. So I think there was a broad announcement. Details are still lacking, so that's what we'll be trying to do next week. But what I do want to say is that AI.
So we might have more news, more clarity in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's the reason why I'm heading in Brussels. But what I do want to say is that AI does not exist in a vacuum, and I think that everything that's been happening in Greece in the past 5 years played a huge role for Greece to be allocated one of the AI factories. Picture this: Greece in 2017 and Greece today, and you hearing the news that you will be one of the first EU countries to have such a factory being deployed, such a project being deployed. It has to do with a series of issues. For example, Greece, when it comes to digitizing public services for the business sector, is above the EU average, around 86%. And the ICT sector, for example, is around 9 billion today and projected to be 15 billion in 2030. Now, obviously, these are not the reason why everything is happening, but these are pieces of a broader puzzle that are slowly starting to make Greece an ecosystem around AI applications that can be used in the public sector, but around companies that can develop these applications more freely.
What initiatives should we expect from the Greek government to help Greece be in the forefront of the AI race?
I feel like when you hear about the Greek government and digital applications, the first thing everyone thinks about is gov.gr, and it makes sense because everyone has used it and have been using it. But I think it's much more than this. The first one we are developing, it's in its beta phase. It's released, but there are some tweaks that need to be fixed. has to do with Gov, to be honest. It's called My AI Gov. It's a digital My AI Gov. It's a digital AI assistant that helps you navigate the intricacies of public administration. It handles queries, it handles questions. It provides you with how you can fill certain applications. Already it has access to more than 2,000 services online and has already managed more than 1.5 million queries from citizens. So consider it your tailor-made GPT to your own public sector experience. The second one is in the tourism industry. Now, I'm guessing you've been to many countries abroad, and one of the few things that you wish will not happen is you may be needing a hospital, you may be needing a doctor, you may be needing to go to a local pharmacy, but at the same time, you might want a tailored experience when it comes to visiting local attractions, when it comes to going to restaurants and so on. So we created My AI Greece, which is available in 31 languages. People can have free access to it, and it helps you not only locate critical resources, such as a pharmacy, a doctor, a hospital, and so on, but also provide you with ideas of what you could be doing with your summer. Of course, it's not just about leisure or improving people's lives when dealing with public administration. Another thing we're actively trying to tackle, and it was developed and deployed in 2024, the summer of 2024, is wildfire prevention, which is a big issue for us. So we've been piloting this summer, and now in 2025 it's going to be a broader implementation of it. Monitors, radars, sensors in different parts of the country that communicate between them, and they detect the early stages of a fire and send an alarm directly to the fire brigade. Only in 2024 alone, during the summer, and again that was the piloting phase, it managed to stop more than 100 early wildfires in the making. And the last thing I want to mention is, again, that's we're piloting it, but the Independent Tax Revenue Authority has managed through data matching using an AI application that they have developed to actually save around 500 million from tax fraud and tax evasion. And
do you actually look for private companies helping you in these areas, in these fronts?
Yeah, that's a good pivoting point. We're obviously working with private providers to help us develop these applications. But what I can say, and I'm hoping that in the next few months that we'll have an announcement on that, we're actively trying to find ways to incubate internally, to create units within government that can develop applications and deploy them in the public sector. That doesn't mean that there won't be interaction with the private sector, but we do believe that we can...
Why do you choose this path?
We do believe that there can be flexible teams within government that can develop applications that use artificial intelligence to make people's lives better. The reason why we're doing this is to, first, it creates institutional capacity and institutional memory if you develop it in-house, keep it in-house, maintain it in-house. The second is because now we can. Because AI, again, gives you the opportunity to reimagine the state in the 21st century, and it gives you the opportunity to develop these things in-house, usually at less of a cost than it would be to outsource it.
That could be a source of revenue for the Greek government, right? Well, you could sell this...
if an idea is good enough and it has been used in Greek public administration and it potentially can be scaled...
It could work on the use cases that you mentioned.
Yeah, we could be doing that. But the point I want to make clear, because I see we're close to time, the point I want to make clear is that this government sees AI as an opportunity, and we're trying to turn the page on the European level as well with a sense of techno-optimism. We want to see these new developments with ambition, with optimism, with a fresh face, and we want our first reaction when we see a new development, a new technology, not to be, whoa, this is going to change my life. It should be, whoa, this is going to change my life. And we're actively trying to find ways to incorporate it.
Okay, last question, Giorgos. Vassilis mentioned other partners, like India, for example. Do you see Europe teaming up with other countries to help with this AI race?
Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes. We can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a necessity that we reach out to new countries, new partners, in order to find synergies that would boost our competitiveness and our sense of security as well when it comes to the supply of AI. Vassilis mentioned India, of course. There was a big high-level meeting that took place last week in New Delhi, and where the Commission announced a deeper partnership between the European AI Office and India's AI Institute, and we expect to see more concrete collaborations from that. But there are also many other countries and regions in the world. Some indicative ones that I want to mention is, of course, the United Kingdom. I think the United Kingdom also shares this perception of seeing AI as an opportunity, and the new government put out a plan called AI Opportunities Action Plan in order to take most advantage of their own research talent that resides in the United Kingdom and their infrastructure. And there are explicit references about, in that document, in the UK's document, about working more closely with the European Union. So I think that is a great low-hanging fruit that will, of course, take some political will and fleshing out the details, but is there. And then lastly, I think some of our partners in Asia as well, and I'm thinking of South Korea and Japan, are two countries that share the EU's approach to AI technology, especially human-centered AI applications, and have also a lot to give. First of all, a fantastic market for European innovators to also expand to in order to increase the revenues, expand their client base, but also fantastic research universities. And we need to see more of that as well. We need to see more collaboration between European researchers and researchers in other regions of the world that work together, not only to publish papers, but actually to come up with a product that is commercialized and can actually make it to the market.
Thank you so much, both. Thank you.
Thank you.